So, Dean, before we begin our new special episode of Vito X Dino, I have a question for you. What do you think is the greatest line ever spoken on television? Because I know what the answer is, and it's not like there's a poll or like a list of any, or there is, but they don't count because it's all subjective anyway. But like, I know what the absolute best line ever spoken on television was.
I'm trying to think of like endings of TV shows like the Mary Tyler Moore Show where they've all been fired, I think, except for maybe Ted Grant, who's like the idiot, right?
Right.
And they're all huddled together. Can't let go, but they're all crying and there's a box of tissue on Mary's desk or something like that, and they all
Mhm.
move together. But I don't think there's like a line of dialogue there. And then I'm thinking about the movie Some Like It Hot, which
Mhm.
is not a TV show,
Right.
where at the end, Jack,
Nobody's perfect.
there's a guy, right, that's in love with Jack Lemmon who's dressed like a woman, and then Jack Lemmon's like, I can't have kids, I can't do this, I can't do that, and then finally
Well, it
he pulls
does.
off his wig, and he's like, I'm a man, and the guy says, well, nobody's perfect, like, and that's awesome. But I'm sure if I had time to think about it, I might actually have a
Right.
real
I'm giving
answer.
this to you off the top of my head. The
Right.
greatest line ever spoken in a television show was on Curb Your Enthusiasm, where Larry's receptionist says, and I quote, I think I've given you the wrong impression. Larry's anus is fine.
You know what that is? That reminds me of like when you're walking down the street. Whitney Matheson, my studio mate, was just telling me something today. You're walking down the street and you hear one line of dialogue from someone's
Mm.
conversation, and like sometimes those are the best like prompts, or or they just stick with you. Like I did that with when I did a Entertainment Weekly asked me to write and draw basically an obituary for Harvey Picar,
Mm.
and I wrote about him briefly to get a quick overview, but then I wanted to say how he impacted me. And I remember walking past a construction site, and I saw this construction worker on the phone. I think he was talking to his girlfriend or wife, and he said something like, I got loopy and I'm taking loopy home. Right. And I love that line. And what the reason why I put it in a Picar obituary memorial was because Picar taught me to listen and to hear,
Yeah.
and the things that you would capture like he did in his comics. And while we're talking, so that, and you know what, I've seen maybe one episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm.
You're missing out.
I know, I know. But while we're here talking, I want to introduce our first time guest and the first time we're doing this on our podcast, and that's Russ Kazmierczak. Hello, Russ. How you doing?
Hello. Good.
He, he's my favorite Phoenix cartoonist. And actually, there's a whole bunch of Arizonian cartoonists. I forget, somebody was just the other day was saying how they were in Arizona. I was like, oh, you should probably get to know Russ, unless you already do. And now I'm forgetting the name of the cartoonist. But you truck with other cartoonists, poets, writers, all kinds of folks. So, and I got to know Russ because he was an associate artist that I helped mentor at the Atlantic Center for the Arts 2 years ago now.
Yeah, 2 years ago this month.
2 years ago this month. But also, you told me when I met you that you were an early fan of Activate, and Activate was the webcomics collective that I basically created and co-founded on the Live Journal blogging platform, where about 7 or 8 cartoonists would produce weekly free comics. And Russ was one of the apparently one of the first people, or a fan since then. Let's put it that way. So, but Russ, please tell us a little bit, and Vito, who you're meeting, I think for the first time here, right?
First time, yeah.
Yes. Although I understand we
give
are.
us a little background.
Well, first of all, I understand that Vito and I are Superpowers fans and
Yes.
collectors, so we could talk about that. But it's a pleasure to meet you. And yeah, I grew up in Phoenix and was introduced to comics through Masters of the Universe and Superpowers action figures. They came with little comics that kind of embellished the character's backstory, that action figures character. So that was really my introduction to comics. And because those issues were so small, I think they instantly instilled in me this idea that size doesn't matter when it comes to comics. Comics can come in any size. So when I started self-publishing my own comics back in 2010 as kind of a solo act, I decided to pay homage to some of the zines I remember seeing around ASU when I was a kid here in Arizona, like on Mill Avenue. That would be like our, that's like the street next to the campus where all the bars are and stuff. So the late night coffee shop, there were always zines in that area. So in high school, we'd cruise up there on a Saturday night and just watch the college kids smoking their cloves and whatnot. So wearing their flannels and listening to their, Dead Milkmen and Dead Kennedys and whoever else was a deceased band. But anyway, so I remember seeing zines like this. I felt like in the street. In fact, I think Jim Mahfood was kicking around Tempe at that time. So anyway, when I started making my own comics, I wanted to pay homage to that format. And remembering that size doesn't matter, I just started making these mini comics. And I've been doing it ever since. I just finished Dean, as you know, issue 53, which is here in my hand. I'm working on issue 54 right now. And I still kind of have that excitement and vigor for it that I've had since day one, making comics with my buddy in California, and now writing, drawing, lettering, coloring, folding, stapling, these things all on my own.
So there's something that you that we also share similarities for in terms of our comics, which is pun related characters,
Right.
where I have in my Red Hook, New Brooklyn universe, I have the Coney, which is, a character from Coney Island, the Green Point, the Sheep's Head, the Flatbush. I mean, Bensonhurst. They're all Brooklyn, neighborhoods or streets or whatever. And I have more than to go. And it's always tricky. It's a slippery slope because it's goofy and it's meant to be funny, but then that could turn people off or it could draw people. It's like one of those deal breakers type thing. And you have, for how many years now, amazing Arizona comics where you are basically you take from the headlines and then you create characters from that. And can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, the origin of that is I did live in California for about 12 years, and I made comics with a buddy there. I just wrote the scripts and he would draw them beautifully. So when I moved back to Phoenix, I wanted to continue self-publishing, but I had to draw these comics on my own. So I've always drawn, but sequential storytelling was a new kind of a next level experience for me. So once I got over the hurdle of drawing that first page like 5 times, you know how it goes, I decided to just power through. But I was watching CNN one night, kind of wistful, missing California, and wondering what this comic I was going to create should be. And I saw our Sheriff Joe Arpaio, who was a pretty controversial figure at the time, kind of still is. He's still alive. He's very old, but he was on CNN talking about, and it's funny how like the news and history cycles. He was talking about immigration, and we had just passed a state bill, SB 1070, which was kind of the show me your papers law. So again, here we are in 2025 talking about the same thing. So it goes to show,
evergreen.
I guess,
it's evergreen. There's certain topics. Yeah.
When you dip into stories that are ripped from the headlines, you're running the risk of telling a very dated story. But I think you could see that every decade or so, you might find a revised significance or enthusiasm for that topic. But anyway, I see Joe Arpaio on CNN. And again, I was missing California, and every night I'd watch TMZ and just think, man, I used to be right there in the heart of it. And everybody talks about Los Angeles. That's the center of the universe. But here's Arpaio on CNN one night talking about Arizona. And I thought, this is a global platform that he's on, talking about where I live right now. And it just dawned on me, like, if Commissioner Gordon were real, he would probably be like a talking head on these network TV shows, like a CNN and Anderson Cooper. He'd be talking to Bill O'Reilly every night, whoever, about vigilante crime fighting or how crime is rampant in Gotham and what do you do against a Joker and stuff. So it just...
I think he would hate every minute of it. I think he would...
I know, yeah.
They'd be like, "Oh, that's the cool. Let's talk to that guy. He knows," and he would hate every second of it.
Right. Oh
I
yeah.
could see
You,
him
you think
even
about the way
using.
Gordon.
I could see him using the platform like he does the bat signal, like to like maybe throw out some curveballs to see who he could, fool a criminal into exposing
Sure.
himself or something. That would be interesting. Vito, you got to write that story, man.
I
Absolutely.
I can see it. I can already see it in my head.
Totally, man.
Yeah, he could
But
say
you,
something very throwaway, like, the Riddler's on the rampage. We've already solved all the riddles. We're right behind him. We're going to get him
right,
here
right,
within
right, and
hours.
then he gets all pissed off. He's like, "What?" They're trying to come up with more riddles, like. But you
So
know
yeah, it
what?
just occurred to me that, like, if Arpaio, if Gordon were real, he would be this figure that Arpaio was on the news. So if superheroes were real by extension, Arpaio would probably recruit them and exploit their presumed celebrity, which he had been doing at the time anyway. He kind of had this pseudo celebrity posse with Steven Seagal and Lou Ferrigno. You could Google that he like kind of gave them an honorary deputized status, and they went and busted like cockfighting rings and stuff like that.
Oh
Really
my
weird
God.
stuff. So I created some superheroes based on different aspects of Arizona living, and started telling the story about how he had recruited them, and they slowly kind of came into their own, grew up a little bit, went off on their own, and that's where they stand now, independent of those kind of first 6-10 issues that I established all of that in. Now I just tell these kind of episodic stories where they are mostly inspired by current events or news.
How did
So
you
before I'm going
find
to get back
yourself?
to a question. Oh, well, I'm going to say, Vito, real quick. Did you? I know you draw, but did you ever start making comics by drawing them first and deciding just to write them?
Who, me?
Yeah.
No, I I will do the occasional thumbnail if it's a sequence that I can't kind of script my way out of. But for the most part, I've never tried doing sequential artwork like ever, like other than like stick figures or something like that.
Okay.
Nothing too intricate. Only because I think I can get my point across well enough with words. It's only whenever I'm working with someone whose language skills are like English isn't their first language that I have to dive into doing something more visual to kind of get the point across. But otherwise, like I'll do stuff for myself, just to. I've done this. I've actually drawn panels on a page. Like I know it's going to be like 6 panels, let's say, and I'll write the dialogue in the panels instead of drawing it. That's how averse I am to drawing a comic.
Well, that's how Harvey Pekar wrote. He would
Yeah,
take a piece of paper and draw a line down the middle and then 3 lines across. He had like 8 panels, whatever, and then the occasional stick figure talking. Right. I always maintain that he never really wrote comics. The artist made it into a comic. Yeah. So you were gonna have a question, I thought,
yeah. I
just
wanted
now
to
for
ask
Russ.
Russ, like, since he's basically a native Arizonan, from what I can tell, lived in.
Actually, I was born in Connecticut, but we
Oh,
moved here when I was 8. So
there you go. So, born in Connecticut, moved to Arizona, lived in California. How did you come to meet Dean in New York? Like, how did you do that session with him?
oh, that was actually in Florida at the Atlantic Center for the Arts.
Oh,
I was following Dean on Instagram and literally laying on this couch one night scrolling, and I saw a pop up that might have been one of those like collaborative or shared posts where it's like posted by 2 people.
mhm.
Maybe they tagged you, Dean, or something in it, but it said, join us for or apply for this artist's residency, a word that I had no concept of at the time. What does this mean exactly, a residency? But yeah, apply for this artist residency. And one of the disciplines is cartooning. I think the other 2 were memoir writing and music of some kind. And I was like, that sounds really interesting. What does that mean? So I like toiled for weeks over that application. I actually watched a lot of shows like this one you guys are doing now that Dean was on to kind of get his language so I could skew my essays like into something maybe he'd really appreciate, although
I'm
we share a lot of
sorry.
I know, it was rough. It was really rough.
Little did Russ know the only thing he had to do was sign an NDA to be in my
Yeah.
residency.
But yeah, I applied, waited with bated breath, and one morning the "you were accepted" email arrived, and I was super excited, planned the trip, and it's something now that I encourage all of my cartoonist friends to pursue if they find these opportunities to have that kind of immersive experience. I mean, there are other variables involved. If you're going to do a 3 week, basically cartooning retreat, is one, it's a good idea not to have a family, and two, to have a super supportive boss if you have a day job, which I really do. I mean, my boss at my 9 to 5 is kind of my secret weapon when it comes to making these comics because she's so supportive of my needing time off to do cons, to go to that residency, to do gigs around town. I do some workshops and tutoring with kids for comics. She gives me opportunities to do that, time off to do that. So anyway, if you have that in your pocket, that's a variable to consider. But it was just I was looking at the right place on Instagram at the right time, and it all worked out. And it is honestly, without exaggeration, 3 of the best weeks of my life. It was such an opportunity to be surrounded, not just with Dean, but to meet all of these other people. James Green down there in Florida, Ken, that drew I Kill Giants. Is that the name of that book that he worked on? Ken Nomura, Whitney, of course. I mean, just people that made a tremendous impact, not by even saying anything specific, but just by watching them draw. So many of us draw alone sometimes in our studio or at home, or maybe over coffee with a buddy for a couple of hours. But when you're really in a groove for hours and days on end, that's often an isolating experience. Not even in a bad way necessarily, but you're just doing it alone in your own head, you at the drawing board or at your tablet. And so just to look up and see Dean working on COVID Cop at the time, James was working on his the comic that he's just putting out now, the
Windlords.
Windlords, yeah. So that was just incredible, and it's like cemented in my mind, that camaraderie. So,
and Whitney was writing the first chapters of her memoir, and sticking up on the wall just like we were doing with our artwork. She got the idea, I'm going to put words on the wall, so but Vito, in some way, Russ, what you're talking about, and it's so important to me, and we're losing it more and more because of how expensive the world is, and with pandemics and all the uncertainty of our government and the insanity that we're living through right now. But I shared a studio with Vito as well, and there is an undeniable energy, and there's that when you want to quit, you kind of can't quit because the other person over there is doing it. So you got to almost lance that energy and access that, ability to just keep moving forward, and
we kind of go back and forth on the show for the past couple of episodes about the importance of Hang Dai in the creation of Red Hook, of New Brooklyn, Purple Heart. We glanced upon it a couple of weeks ago when we talked about Stray, where you were I would ask you, does this make sense in a letter, like lettering, or whatever, and we had that kind of similar dynamic where we were all in the same space. We all came in at different intervals, during the time. Like Swifty Lang was there, Krista Casano, Greg Benton, and we're all not doing the same thing. Swifty and I are writers. Everyone else is an artist. And so, but even in that respect, Greg is almost like a fine artist, where he's working with paints and less of kind of a sequential storytelling. Krista was a fine artist that kind of started learning how to do sequential artwork through I think Yaddo is when she learned it, right?
No, actually, Krista I met at the first residency at the Atlantic Center for the Arts 10 years earlier.
That's amazing.
And yeah, she had an innate ability to make comics, but you're right. She came from illustration and fine art first. It's funny when you say Gregory Benton, who lives across the street from where I grew up on the Upper West Side. I remember it would start to get dark at night, and that's kind of when I start to wake up, to be honest. I don't know why that is, but
I can vouch.
He'd be like, I'm out. I'm like, what? Why? It's only 6 o'clock or something. And he's like, I only use natural daylight for my art.
That
Damn. Okay. All
is
right.
such a great thing to
I know.
say.
I was like, oh, kumbaya, my lord. And I was like,
But we didn't go so far as to put pieces on the wall or anything like that. But anytime someone printed a comic, it was like we would share it around. I even had not an inbox, but I had like a something at the front of my desk where we could just pull and read and stuff and just read each other's work.
but Russ, I know you're very social and you go out and do these, you host things, you're a joiner, you're also a progenitor, you make things happen. And I see in the picture right behind you in the distance is an art table. I assume that's where you draw.
Oh yeah, that's my
Right.
little at-home studio there.
So have you ever considered creating a studio, joining a studio?
I have solicited my friends, especially since our experience in Florida and New Smyrna Beach, and it's an uphill battle to convince working artists to invest, because that's just another rent bill that they'd have to pay that month. And I kind of see it two ways. I certainly sympathize with that. And maybe I take for granted that I have a stable 9 to 5 and maybe I could carve that into my budget. But I also see that as, well, if you really want your art to take off, that kind of investment drives you to at least make that money back every month. So rather than sitting on your comics, your artwork, or whatever you're working on, it propels you to get it out there and to sell to compensate for those expenses. So I think that like working from home, as much as it's maybe more practical and affordable, it's also very comfortable. You're in this bubble and the camaraderie is valuable, but I think the financial commitment is valuable too, because it's this motivator to, okay, I'm chipping in 250, $300 a month on the space. I need something to sell so I can, hang for the next month.
Did you ever have any pushback on when you were starting off this conversation with the format and how a comic could be any size because of how you were introduced to comics, right? You ever get any pushback on your zines or the comics you produce as that's not a real comic?
A little bit. I remember taking them into a local shop that is now out of business. So maybe they made the wrong move in not selling this moneymaker right here. But yeah, they said, we're more into the standard sized, kind of floppies. And I understand that. There is a logistical element to accommodating something of different sizes, but you could put that in, you could put one of these in a regular, bag and board, and then all of a sudden it has morphed into the regular size of a comic, at least on your new release stand. So there are accommodations there, but honestly, not as much as you'd think, or maybe not as much as the question even implies.
Right. I mean, again, it implies because of size, or it's something you Xerox folded and stapled. It can't be real, right? But
Right.
Vito, can you speak to, having worked at Jim Hanley's Universe for many years, working at a comic shop, like how would you have viewed, or how do you view a zine like that in your comic shop?
When we were looking at mini comics and self-published comics that were not through any kind of traditional distribution, we kind of judged it on its own merits. Like we didn't care about size, we didn't care about format. I'm trying to remember his name, but there was a guy who put out this mini comic called Flint Flicker. Do you remember? And the thing is, it was amazing, like, because it came in like a little slipcase, but it was only about yay big, which is about 2x3, I think. So it was a mini comic, smaller than most mini comics. Most mini comics are half of the size of a regular comic, but this was tiny. And the thing is, it was such a well-made thing. I think that was the thing that we cared about more, was less about format and more about the creativity and art that went into it. And by and large, there were very few, and I say this with both pride and with both embarrassment in equal measure. There were very few mini comics that we didn't take in. We need to one day talk about Westone Page.
I remember Westone Page. I remember opening up the first page of a Westone Page comic And my favorite thing ever, and me and I think me and Bob Fingerman used to call each other on the phone and read the credits page
Uh,
because the credit. What was the name? Was his name Westover?
Emmanuel P. Gill.
All right, so written by Emmanuel P. Gill, penciled by Emmanuel P. Gill, inked by Emmanuel, lettered, colored, edited, whatever you could get a credit on, and then his full name, and it took up almost the whole page, and that was one of my favorite things ever about
It was like
Westover.
first base Bugs Bunny, second base Bugs Bunny, third base Bugs
Right,
Bunny.
that's right, that's right.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I
And,
remember.
you know what? The craziest thing about we're talking about aesthetics basically, but the craziest thing about that is that we would get that guy's comic, and I would just be like, "This looks terrible. This does not look like any kind of sense of anatomy that anybody would care for." There's like weirdly sexually explicit language and depictions and stuff. And I swear to Jesus Christ, our Lord in heaven, we would sell out of that thing within minutes of getting it in. And there's no the truth is there's no answer to it. Like sometimes you hit the zeitgeist, sometimes you just like Dean and Bob, like just like we're having fun looking at this book.
Oh, it
And
was such joy. It brought joy. Later on, that artist would change his name
yeah,
to Rob Liefeld. He became Rob Liefeld.
but yeah,
Did you hear that Rob Liefeld quit Marvel forever as of today or yesterday?
Marvel
Did,
must
did you
be
see the
Marvel must be
news?
shaking. What do we
Well,
got to do?
no, he's mad because, and I haven't listened to his 90-minute podcast, Robservations, but the most recent one, apparently he talks about how he felt basically snubbed, I think at the Wolverine Deadpool after
Because he
party.
didn't get to go to the after party.
Oh, did Blake Lively put him in the basement?
Uh,
Or
oh, oh my Lord.
That
I
is the
mean,
most.
I understand the gripe. I get the gripe, but whatever. Well, you know
Well,
what?
let's remember he was at the premiere. He just didn't get to go to the after party.
Right, right.
My tears are real, man.
I know, I know, I know. So wait, I want to go back to Russ and talk briefly about something that you went through a really big change recently in your comics making, and maybe part of it had to do with going to a residency, a couple of years ago, and then whatever what was it, issue 50 or 51 you were working on at the time?
I was actively working on issue 50, but issue 51 was like an app running in the background of my brain. I had that story in mind. I think I ran it by you then. You had a few notes, and I was like,
Right, right,
maybe
right,
not. But you really helped with issue 50. I mean,
right.
yeah, your input on 50 was incredible. And then you looked at the thumbnails for 51 and really straightened out some of the kinks in the knots of that story that I had. But
But do you feel like that
later.
there was a creative like do you feel like you are doubling down more now on your comic than ever before? Because I feel like there was a
Oh,
shift, especially with
yeah.
issue 53, which I is a fascinating shift in your work.
Can we
If you could
stop a
describe
second?
that.
Can we
Yeah,
stop a second and kind of appreciate the fact that this guy in his own home studio is up to 53 issues of a comic?
I know, I know.
Like,
It's pretty
are you
amazing.
kidding me? Like,
I know.
this Russ is the new Steve Ditko when you think about it.
Joe.
Oh, man.
And like I
Well,
used
I'd
to
let Conchioli in if he came by. That's the difference between me.
but what I used to tell everyone was when they were coming in and my bread and butter is superhero comics, and I talked about it today on my Substack about there's a there's an arbitration of what's a legit superhero comic and what's not because of who publishes it and doesn't. And so going back to like your almost like the pushback that you had on your book, yours is a superhero comic, but it doesn't look like the Amazing Spider-Man or whatever. And I always contended that Steve Ditko was the patron saint of all of us, even though we recognized that he had some issues of mental illness, if not just social anxiety, and he was very principled in the way he conducted himself. And it was so easy at the time to just go, this guy's crazy. But like, as you got to read his letters and you got to read his gripes and you got to read his comics, you realized he's not crazy. He's just principled. And like, you start to respect that. And, and I say like Russ is like the new Steve Ditko just based on output. Like I don't definitely want to put any kind of onus on him to put more out or to sacrifice something to live up to that moniker. It's just that by virtue of output, I think Russ is kind of like a new version of Steve Ditko.
What we're capturing the spirit of, and
Yeah.
to give a little more context to what you're saying, is we're not talking Spider-Man, Doctor Strange, Steve Ditko. We're
Right.
talking about when I knocked on his door the first time, and I met him 5 times, okay, at his office studio in Midtown, a couple blocks away from DC Comics. And I had not seen him really put out a comic in a while from Marvel, DC, or anybody, and I wasn't aware necessarily of the comic he was self-publishing, okay? And so I knocked on his door, and at one point I said to him, "Are you still making comics?" And he goes, "Every day."
Yeah.
And he was still making comics every day. And that's what I rediscovered. Oh, he's doing these wacky other things. Now, they were a little difficult to comprehend and read, and of course he was getting a lot older, so his art was becoming a little more not streamlined, but like simpler, but weirdly also complex. Which, I don't know if you saw any of this stuff, Russ. Any of these?
Oh yeah, absolutely, I have. Yeah, Mr. A.
Well, Mr. A was like was a long time ago. This was like more weirder stuff. And also he would write like almost like Alex Toth would write you a diatribe on a postcard. He was also writing his like version of what had happened, with Stanley and Spider-Man, and talking about fan bases. He was really intrigued by what is a fan, and what is legend and what is ownership and all that kind of stuff, So, I mean, what are some of the creators that drive you, Russ?
Some of my favorite comics creators.
Yeah.
Darwin Cook is a big one. You can find some of his interviews on YouTube, and his sensibilities about superheroes are right in line with my own. I think he saw them as a very pure, young at heart kind of genre. And it's funny the way he talks. He'll use adult language to talk about the purity of, superhero comics. Like, I don't want to see Batman's dick in a comic book and stuff like that. But Darwin Cook, I got a Parker I got the big Parker Last Call sitting right here on my coffee table. Of course, you, Dean, I got Jess Face right here. I got, in anticipation of our conversation, Vito, I got this issue right here that you guys collaborated on. That I didn't realize I had asked Dean to sign, I think, at Terrificon last year. So I grabbed that just to show off my bona fides with you guys. Eric Larson was my guy. You talked about Liefeld, and you think about the image revolution of the early 90s. I was the perfect age for that, 10, 11, 12. So Eric Larson was my guy. I was reading his Spider-Man. I followed him over to the adjectiveless Spider-Man after McFarlane left, and he did that Sinister six-parter. And then there was kind of this hiatus, and all of a sudden I walked into a local comic book shop and saw that Savage Dragon #1, and that might be the first time I recognized an artist by his style. Like I said, oh, that's definitely that guy. Grabbed it, read it on the ride home, mind blown. Okay, I want to start drawing comics on my own now, like this, creating my own characters. And I did create my own Savage Dragon knockoff. His name was just Spike, and he was exactly the Savage Dragon, except instead of a fin, he had like a spike that came out.
You drew a character recently. You drew a character recently that I'm so jealous of, and now I'm forgetting what his name was. It was like 2 issues ago in your series. Was he like made of thumbs or something? What was it? What do you remember?
Oh, I think I just called him the Green Thumb, I think. And his motif was terraforming Arizona, because a couple of years ago we hosted the Super Bowl, and in the marketing materials they made the grandeur of our mountain landscape look a lot closer to the city than it really is, and
right,
entice. That must have been like
right,
the tourist board or
right,
something did that. But
right,
so
right.
the Green Thumb was doing that literally, like physically terraforming the valley to make it look more natural, I
Yeah,
guess.
no, I really, and I mean, again, you always come up with something fun, man. And just going back to Eric Larson, like, I didn't really glom onto the original Image, and I've been published by Image Comics, right? But that wasn't my thing. I was a little bit older. But I've come in the last 5, 6 years, maybe. I've been getting Savage Dragon, and it is next level. I love where Eric Larson has gone. Oh, and we also did. I was in a Savage Dragon. Wait, so are you, Vito?
Yeah. Me
Who
and
drew
Rachel
your story?
Freire.
Oh,
It
I have
was
that.
it was it was drag racing Savage Dragon
That's right.
with Rachel Freire. We did like a faster pussycat kill kill type of motif.
And what was the name of that project again?
Twisted Savage Dragon Funnies.
Right. And everybody did like one page.
No, it was
Oh
like
no,
four.
no.
It was like
In
four,
my
maybe five.
studio, we did a bunch of us did one page of a
Yes.
story,
Yeah.
and then everyone else did like 4 or 5 pages or something like
This
that.
is the back cover of Savage Dragon number 163. This is the
Oh
front
wow.
cover. And we got lucky enough to do like a flip book, and it was called Faster Baby. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, look how great that is.
I
It's
remember
got like Alex Toth vibes,
Yeah.
like it's so cool.
But yeah, like
that.
Eric is uh Eric is another one that I think more so than any other mainstream artist, I think he and Jim Valentino probably maintain that independent aesthetic more so than their contemporaries.
But oddly enough, Eric Larson's Savage Dragon being published in 2025 is probably the only comic, mainstream and or otherwise, independent, obviously, that reminds me of 1960s Marvel, but with sex in it.
More explicit,
Like
yeah.
with actual porn. There's actual porn in it now. You know, it's like
The
a
heart wants what
pornographic.
the heart wants.
That's right, right. It's like, but now, have you even mentioned Speed Cameron, Russ?
Not yet. I've shown him visually a couple
Yeah.
times here, but
You haven't mentioned he's your main guy. Tell us
he
about
is.
Speed Cameron and what happened recently in issue 53. Get us to
Before you
50.
do, like, because this will kind of lead into it, is he kind of a take on the Golden Age character Silver Streak?
No, not
Okay.
originally, but I'm glad you mentioned that because when I became more familiar with Silver Streak as I was making this comic years and years ago, I did have them meet because Silver Streak's in the public domain.
Yeah.
And in my continuity, the Silver Streak was living in Dr. Claw's skull. It was his kind of crime fighting headquarters. And he bequeathed that to Speed Cameron for a while. And Speed Cameron put on the Silver Streak outfit, changed that second S to a C. So it was SC. And now that's kind of morphed into this outfit where that little, it looks like a Star Trek badge,
Yeah.
but it's really an homage to that Silver Streak, the comic's first speedster, that Silver Streak logo. So thanks for saying that. Yeah, because
Well, it's
absolutely.
very, in Dean's cover, it's very pronounced.
Yes,
Or what is that, 53 or 54? I can't remember what
that'll be
issue.
54 coming out. Yeah.
Yeah, like, and it's more like towards the center of his chest than to the left of it. So it just like as soon as I looked at it, I was like, wait a minute, is he like? Because the thing about public domain characters is that you can use them and you can interpret them however you want at this point. So whenever I saw that, I was like, oh, what if he just like turned his version of Silver Streak into Speed Cameron? So I'm very glad to see that there's some kind of
Yeah, it's
connection.
a spiritual successor, just as far as like fast characters. But the literal origin of Speed Cameron is one night shortly after I moved here to Phoenix, we had these traffic cameras all over these speed cameras. And I got popped not once, not twice, but thrice in like a 3 mile stretch. Actually, and I was the designated driver, but it was 2 o'clock after a karaoke night, 2 a.m. And I'm driving what I thought was a conservative 65. Turns out that stretch of highway here in the valley is 55. So at every exit, I got hit with this blinding flash. And I was like, what is that? Because I had just moved back here. And finally, one of my friends was like, oh, dude, you just got like 3 tickets. It's like,
Oh,
what? So I did get those tickets in the mail, but very shortly after that, our governor, Jan Brewer at the time, pulled the plug on those cameras because they were costing the city more money than the revenue they were pulling in, from what I understand. Because you get this thing in the mail, you could just say, oh, I didn't, what ticket? You know, it even says, I think, in the fine print that this is not your actual ticket, but you'd have to really examine the document to know that. Anyway, I think I'm well past the statute of limitations on those, so I'm not like outing myself. But that blinding flash in the dark night gave me this inspiration of like, if superheroes really existed and you were just driving and there was a superhero fight going on the side of the road, you might see something like that and just, whoa, what is that? And it wouldn't be this huge spectacle like you see in movies where people are running from aliens and terror and stuff. You'd just be driving by it on the freeway and be like, oh, what's, you'd kind of rubberneck it. So when I was thinking about what kind of local superhero I'd want to create, Speed Cameron just kind of came to mind. I was playing with different names and that just kind of hit. So I was drawing him in my sketchbook and I landed on the speed camera on his head because I had this tenet in mind where a really memorable character of any kind has a very distinct silhouette.
Yeah.
So and you think about, this is the kind of thing I teach to the kids a lot when I'm in workshops and stuff. Batman, Mickey Mouse, Bart Simpson, Pikachu. You put these characters in silhouette and you instantly know still who they are. So, and Chestface now would be a great example of that too. Like that's a character that if that was just a black figure, you would know that's Chestface alongside others in like a usual suspects row or something. You'd be able to pick them out. So anyway, I drew Speed Cameron, started working on the first issue, and in the comic, he becomes Speed Cameron by speeding down the highway one night himself. And as that speed camera is flashing him, a monsoon bolt of lightning hits him and the camera at the same time. So traditional comic book science demands that he becomes one with that speed camera and adopts its lightning fast reflexes to, if a camera's flashing you going 80, that camera's got to be fast. So if you become one with the camera, now you are fast. And that's like the science behind it. So
you took a negative, right? Getting 3 tickets, and you turned it into a positive. You're reminding me of a quick story that I think I've told Vito, but I don't think I've told you. I had my friend Christian Urich, who's in a band called Tortured Soul, and other AKA Cooley C of Cooley's Hotbox. He's an incredible singer, songwriter, and drummer. And we moved in when I first moved to Brooklyn almost 28 years now ago. We moved together to this apartment because we had both been broken up with. And I was living at my girlfriend's apartment, and I think he might have been living in his. So we had nowhere to go. So we got this place together, basically. And, the first 6 months, you're trying to figure out how to live together and find out your, habits, your trends and everything. But also we were basically heartbroken. So that meant that we were on the phone a lot. And in 1997, I remember getting a phone bill and it was over $400. And that's a lot today.
Yeah.
Back then, that was incredible. And I started sweating bullets. I'm like, I don't have this kind of money. Like what? So, and it used to come itemized, right? So I drew a line to what the phone calls I made, phone calls he made, and mine turned out to be maybe like $75, right? And it still was more than normal for me, but his was like over $300. I remember looking at him and saying, "Dude, look at how much you just spent here." And without skipping a beat, he goes, "I'm a phone call genius," and he had turned a negative into this like, "I'm really good at this," like. And I could not deny him, I was like, what a beautiful sentiment. What a beautiful way to absorb such a hit,
Russ, I did want to ask you, because you brought up something very interesting, in that you were saying that if heroes existed in real life, how would they go about getting their powers? How would they fight for crime? How would they do whatever? What is the appeal? Like I don't know I think Dean does too, to an extent. But I kind of prefer being like fictionalized in a sense where I don't really want to know what a hero would do with power. You know, like I feel like I don't want to find out the answer. But you seem to have, I mean, 53 issues in, you seem to have figured out a way to make it entertaining and to make it interesting to yourself. So, what's the appeal of realism when it comes to superheroes?
Well, I think we are fascinated by celebrity in real life and in on this earth. So if someone were to have, and celebrity nowadays especially is such a fleeting and subjective term. Like I actually had this epiphany the other day watching an Instagram reel. I'm just scrolling as we all do before bed. And there's this kid in the back seat of his mom's car. And he has that, he couldn't have been older than 8 or 10 years old. And let me just say this because I don't know his names. He wasn't particularly cute or anything or adorable. He was just some boy in the back of his mom's car. And he goes, "Hey, everybody, I'm going to eat this mac and cheese from Chick-fil-A. I've never had mac and cheese before. So this is the first time I'm ever going to have mac and cheese. Here we go." And he took a little bite and he goes, "Wow, Mom, this is good." And I'm like, this is just some kid eating mac and cheese in the back of, and I look over at and this thing's got like 750,000 likes. And I'm like, what? I'm lucky to get 20 on a post of a comic book page. It took me all night to draw, right? So you take that to the next level. If somebody had powers, whether they were using them for good or evil, as subjective as those terms are too, I just think there would be an instant fascination. And in my comic, these characters walk around because the implication is the world is kind of over it. We're so stimulated with those different facets and levels of celebrity that, yeah, you could run, 500 miles an hour. You could generate lightning bolts with the monsoon cloud that is your head. You put on a sombrero and you become a superhero. What's going on with this This Is Us lawsuit? Or, hey, I want to go check out, M. Night Shyamalan's kids' new movie and stuff like that. So I just kind of equate it as it all levels out in the end. My characters use their real names a lot of the times, like Speed Cameron. His legal first name is Cameron, because what's the point of a secret identity? I think that if Clark Kent landed on Earth today and grew up and became Superman, he would say, "Hey, everybody, I'm Superman." He'd have his phone up and he'd be flying and he'd be giving us, like, "Hey, I'm just going to shoot over to, Altadena and put out some fires real quick. And then I'm going to go do this and do that." And he would just be, there would be no line blurred between the heroism and the civilian identity. And so when I started making these comics, I just took that trope out and said, these are young adults that are blessed with incredible abilities. Every decision they make is not going to be the right one, but they know at the end of the day, the path of least resistance is to do as good as they can with these powers, so they're not vilified, held accountable, jailed, stuff like that. So that was kind of the rules I set for myself in this when I created this universe.
And if I can add, you're also making the extraordinary relatable through terms that people can understand, like a lawsuit or, events that happen on a daily basis, so that you can kind of, if you want to comment on it as well, right? Like, I was watching, I don't know why you made me think about this, but like I was watching season 3 of The Mayor of Kingston or Kingstown, with
Jeremy Renner, right?
Jeremy Renner, right? And it's an intense show. It's brutal. It's tragic. There's a real heart to it as well, but it's hard. It's a hard show. Okay. And so I'm watching this, and it was season 3, episode 1. And, it's just continuing the story from the first 2 episodes, and, who's still alive and what are the concerns and everything. And at one point, Jeremy Renner is like spackling a hole in his mother's apartment who, spoiler, has been shot to death, but there's these bullet holes, right? And then there's this girl and this and like, but at least he's calmed down and he's just doing something domestic, let's call it, in his home before going back out and shooting people and doing all the, extraordinary kind of stuff that these characters do, even though they're not superheroes. And all I could think about was, this guy doesn't read a comic book. He doesn't even watch a movie. What's his favorite TV show? There's no way. The way these characters are written, I can't imagine. They're going to yawn, sit down on the couch, and I'm going to just chill out for a couple hours and read a book. There's no way that these guys do that. So in a way, they start to become more alien to me because I don't know how. Yes, it is harder sometimes as a freelancer or in 2025 to decide, I'm going to go hang out and just read a book now, because your mind is racing with everything that's going on, right? And it's so unfair to the point where you're like, you just toss your hands in the air and you say, I'm just going to turn off the news. I'm not even going to watch the news. It's going to evolve in a way that I actually have no hand in, like you feel hopeless and helpless, but I guess, and that's why we do escape to comics. So as much as we can relate to a situation that, I can understand, you want that genre to come in and help you surrender to it, depending on how you use the genre or the hybrid of genres, which again, trying to get you to talk about issue 53. So for all intents and purposes, and I've only read a handful of Amazing Arizona comics because I subscribe now, and it's a really great subscription, folks. Vito, you should hop on. It's like four. Explain the subscription.
So this year for 2025, I'm creating these quarterly digests. So for $30 for the year, you'll get these 4 volumes in the mail. One in March, I hope. One in June, September, and December. So
you sound like me.
Say again?
You sound like me trying to fulfill Kickstarter, I hope.
I know. So yeah, back when the pandemic hit and we didn't know if Comic-Cons were going to be around anymore, I just kind of floated out this idea on my social media. I said, hey, if you guys want to get my comics and zines in the mail, I'll do a subscription for the year. And a lot of my friends and some fans, I call fans just the friends of mine that read my books that I don't know personally, I guess, right? So these people kind of came out of the woodwork and said, yeah, we want to keep getting your stuff. So I've been doing it ever since and finding the right economy for it, because that first year was like, I'm going to send you stuff every month. And then by March, I'm like, what the hell was I thinking? So then it became like every other month. And now I'm doing quarterly. But I'm really going to create these substantial digests that include both my comics and my writing. And this is where Dean is trying to drag me to, I think. In issue 53, I had this kind of epiphany. I visited Cleveland. I was there with my girlfriend. She was at a conference. And while I was there in town, I decided to visit the Jerry Siegel home, the Siegel and Schuster neighborhood in Cleveland, where Superman was born. That had been on my bucket list for a long time. But I had just kind of come into, and this is kind of coincidental to getting to know Dean personally, but I had just kind of come into an appreciation and a fandom for American Splendor. I have this handy right here that I picked up just a couple weeks ago, actually. But I'd been reading some PCAR stuff and realized, okay, he's in Cleveland too. He was in Cleveland as well. So I'll find where his stomping grounds are. I just looked up Harvey PCAR Cleveland. There's a PCAR Park named after him, about 10 minutes from the Siegel and Schuster homestead. So I go to that old neighborhood where Jerry and Joe met, grew up, created Superman, drive over to PCAR Park. And the term park is pretty generous because it's basically this courtyard in front of a strip mall. But it's in a very cool part of Cleveland, Cleveland Heights. And I just started thinking, like, the paragon of superhero comics and the pillar of memoir autobio comics, they're within like 10 minutes of each other. Of course, like 50 years apart too, but just trying to figure out like what's in the Dean put it, what's in the water here? What's in what and maybe these lines aren't as hard in the sand as I thought between these genres. So in issue 53, I kind of interject myself into the comic and make it more of a memoir comic where I interrupt Speed Cameron's adventure and take him on this road trip with me in Cleveland. I said, we're going to go see the sequel house together. We're going to go see the Picard house together because this is what I want our story, his and mine, to be, this kind of immersive comic experience where it celebrates everything about comics that I love. I could have a superhero fight on one page and then some navel gazing on the next, and it all makes sense in the grand scheme. And Speed Cameron's basically like, okay, I mean, I don't have a choice. I don't really have much of a choice here. And so in issue 54, that I could have just presented that as a concept and let it be. And then, in issue 54, incorporated some American Splendor-esque stories of my own alongside Speed Cameron and his friends' regular stories. But I'm finding a way to have that line so blurred that, Speed Cameron's kind of met his maker and he doesn't know what to do with that information. So when a supervillain per usual shows up, he's kind of looking up like, is there a deeper meaning to this? Is this just a one-off story? Is this an analogy for something going on in your life? He's kind of talking up to me at the drawing board. And when things happen, there are going to be consequences for both of us. So that's where I'm at
almost
right
like
now.
almost like a butterfly effect, in some ways, right? Like,
Yeah, or Grant Morrison and Animal Man.
Grant Morrison. I mean, it's been done. It's been done in so many different ways. I did a version of that with the Red Hook ex Dean Haspiel. We never confront the fact that I'm the creator of the Red Hook, but we have a different conversation. A couple of things. I think I'm the only person to have made this discovery or comment, because I don't think anybody else has. And I remember doing this when I was working on The Quitter. Harvey Pekar talks about reading, superhero comics before he started doing his own memoir comics. And if you look at the logo for American Splendor, the A, and you look at the logo of Action Comics, that was a lot of Superman comics, it's very similar.
Yeah.
Right? So there's a connective tissue right there. And another thing that, speaking of the water, you can't not acknowledge, Ohio, it's yielded Paul Pope, Jeff Smith of Bone, Peter Cooper. I mean, a bunch of great
Milton
cartoons
Caniff.
have come out. Milton Caniff, come on, that's pretty amazing. So, but I loved this issue where you tackle this idea of blurring those lines, because it made it more exciting to read and oddly more relatable. I was just talking to Jonathan Ames today because I'm reading his new book, Karma Doll, which is the third in a series of crime novels featuring a character named Happy Doll, which you have to read to find out why it's called that, or he's called that. And something happens, and Vito, I know you're reading it too, and I don't think you've gotten as far as I have toward the end of part 1. Something happens that I've never seen before done in at least a crime novel. And it was so much fun, and it made me shudder and cringe, which, again, Vito, I'm curious to know if this happens to you when you read it. And I was talking to him today, and I was like, because he was famous for writing true stories about his life. Like he had essay collections. He wrote for the New York Press. He would write about himself a lot. Then we did a collaboration called The Alcoholic. That's, loosely based, but it's very memoir type of a book, a story. And then he abandoned that, and he would put himself or tell versions of himself like in Bored to Death. It was very Jonathan Ames adjacent, even to the point where the main character's name was Jonathan Ames. Okay. But now he's completely gone. I'm creating a crime character in a crime novel. And I was saying to him today, I was like, I think this is even more of a memoir because it's so much more emotionally true, I think. And he agreed with me. He was like, yeah, you know what? you're right. This is because I'm not saying it's me, and it's not, as I said to him, you're not culpable to the plausibility of facts and times and this and that. Like you can really figure out what is the truth through genre, through fiction. Which is why, as much as I enjoy a good memoir, at the end of the day, I'd rather read. Well, I wouldn't rather read Peter Parker over Harvey Pekar, because really what we're talking about tonight, gentlemen, is Peter Pekar, aren't we?
I was going to say they're almost the same thing.
They are almost the same thing. So I think that is, as we enter 2025 and the business of comics starts to blur as well. A bunch of we've discussed Diamond, which was a distributor that filed Chapter 11 bankruptcy, and then a lot of the smaller publishers, let's say, don't have a distribution system right now, or they're struggling to find another distributor. And there are other distributors. I think in the long run, the biggest mistake was that there was a monopoly. There used to not be a monopoly, and then it became a monopoly distribution. So a lot of publishers that have overhead, that have offices, and all kinds of bills are suffering. Meanwhile, Russ in Phoenix, Arizona, you just got to get enough scratch to be able to print up, this book, and I assume you're still like folding and stapling these books.
Well, the new volumes this year will be printed by a third party for the first time, because I'm intending for them to have like a spine. I just had this epiphany after that Cleveland trip that I wanted to try something a little different, but not so far out of my comfort zone that it was like, paralyzing to consider. So the digests will be the same size, but all of the writing I would have normally formatted into individual zines, I'm just putting all into the one volume. So you're going to have a lead comic book story, you're going to have some memoir comics, then you're going to have essays, some travel logs, some reviews, things like that. So everything I normally make just all kind of vomited into one.
It's like the Russ Kazmierczak Reader's Digest, almost.
Very much so. Yeah. Yep.
So we're running low on time, and I wanted to give Russ the opportunity to take advantage of both of us here and just ask us anything. Like, just like, not that he needs us, obviously. Like, he's figured something out that works. So,
and I do have a final. I did ask Whitney Matheson, who was here today in the studio, to ask us a question. So she gave me a question to ask us.
Okay.
Oh, let's do that.
Yeah, let's do that.
You want to do that first?
Yeah, that'll be a good one.
All right. So let me go to it right now. And this is what I wrote down.
Dean, you know how to read, right?
Yeah, but I always feel like I sound like I'm reading, because I am. Okay. What is something from your childhood? There you go. See? What is something from your childhood? Oh my God.
You can read, but you can't speak. That's all.
Is it some sort of Freudian block that you can't say the word childhood?
I can't say childhood.
You're like Fonzie trying to say I love you.
What is something from your childhood that
Is she in the room?
No, she's not. What is something from your childhood that you repurchased as an adult? For instance, Whitney recently bought a stuffed cherry from Pee-wee's Playhouse.
I mean, Russ and I both have the same affinity. Here's my Blue Beetle bug with Blue Beetle inside. Like, we both have jumped on the McFarlane Toys Superpowers action figures revival. There it is.
Look at that.
Do you have your booster in there? You have your booster in there.
I do have booster in there, yeah.
I haven't cracked open my booster yet, but yeah.
I mean, the only thing I can show are my blue balls. So let me just climb up.
Please. It's supposed to be the shirt guy.
Those look booster gold to me.
I drew a Booster Gold and Blue Beetle story for what was it called? It was this initiative that DC Comics did in the 80s. It was a bonus book There was this bonus book initiative where you get like 16 pages inserted into a comic. And I think this was in like a Justice League International.
Yes.
And I penciled it. Listen, it still was bad, but I penciled it at that time to the best of my ability. Then I fell off a 3-story building, broke both my legs and my drawing hand. I was in a wheelchair. And then I had to ink it with a brace on my hand, which, not so good.
Yeah,
So
but you
there's
did
this,
the best you could.
but I did the best I could.
I mean,
Tell that to the fan that read that comic and was like, this is garbage. They don't care. Fans are fickle, my friend. They don't care. But yeah, anyway. I don't. So you guys repurchased that? That was the part of the question.
Well, yes and no. Those are new, but I do have old ones. Here, let me grab two that are closest. I have Steppenwolf,
Oh, wow.
Jack Kirby Steppenwolf, and then I have
Cool.
a Flash. But I also have a couple that are unopened that I put away because the mechanism of Superpowers action figures, Dean, you might not remember this. You might have been a little bit, you might have aged out of it at that point. But you would squeeze their legs and their arms would go, or you would, on the Flash, you squeeze his arms and his legs run. And after a while, the mechanism gets worn down and they're not like fresh like that. So in my head, I'm like, let's buy ones that are unopened so that when I do open it, I can still play with it. And I'm like, why? I'm not going to play with it. Why am I going to play with it? Like, but the mentality is still there that I bought them in the box because I want to be able to open them fresh, like as if it was a new thing.
But now I'm feeling some, like I just went to Toy Story right now, and a toy that's unplayed with. Oh my God!
Yeah,
It's a tragedy over at your house right now.
Oh no, man. You know what it is? I love the thing about action figures is just kind of like Whitney was saying in her question is that, you're repurchasing a bit of your childhood. And as I get older, I realize that men have a harder time letting go of their childhood than women do. Maybe it has something to do with childbirth. Maybe it has something to do with the burdens of motherhood and being the woman of the house and stuff. Whereas men are given the opportunity to kind of they have to let go of it sooner. Like they have to let go of their childhood sooner. So because they have to be a man, quote unquote, and grow up and stuff. And so then there's this kind of arrested thing within us that we have to use this stuff to recapture. I never stopped buying comics. I still buy action figures, more than I care to admit. And I think that says something to it. I just don't know if I'm just speaking for myself or if I'm speaking for men at large or not.
I don't really. I collected the Star Trek dolls, I'll say, and the Star Wars little figures when they first came out with Star Wars, and GI Joe, $60 Million Man, and all and some of the Marvel and DC characters, the Mego toys,
Yes.
And then later on in life, my brother became like, you can look him up, and he's when I say famous, he was very well known for customizing Mego dolls and had a huge collection. And then when he passed away, I got some of those toys from our childhood, but then a lot of the customized ones went to a friend of his who kind of honors him and keeps him like in a museum quality type room. But I'm forgetting who gave this to me. I want to say it was Whitney, but I'm going to show you a doll that is near me right now.
Yeah.
I got a Bootsy Collins doll.
Did I get you a I want to say an Escape from New York Snake Plissken, didn't I?
You might, and that's somewhere, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure you did. The other doll I have is, and I actually have a Silver Surfer that was given to me. And one of my favorite movies is a horror movie called Tourist Trap. And Chuck Connors, I won't spoil it, but let's just say he's equally a protagonist and an antagonist. And they made a Chuck Connors doll for Tourist Trap that's just so absurd. Like, why would you? I don't need that, but I have it. Like it's because the real villain of the movie is kind of like a poor man's Leatherface, and it's so much more interesting to look at than Chuck Connors. Like that was the one doll they made, which is so weird. Anyway, And
Russ,
I didn't answer the question that Whitney asked because I feel like it might be comic books. I
so
think
you probably still
sometimes you
buy
get rid
them.
of comic books and then you wind up buying the same ones again later, you know?
Yeah.
And I'm sure I've gotten some other stuff because you're right. What starts to happen as you get older is, you look at something, a toy, hell, okay, all right, here's my answer. I remember going to a yard sale in the Catskills with my mom. And it was this huge dumping ground of just stuff, right? And little blankets, and there were like prices. And I come upon a bunch of metal plates. Each plate was a flat plate, with a little ridge on it. And it was like one color. One was yellow, one was green, red, blue, whatever, orange. And they were, they were used. And I said to my mom, I was like, Mom, those remind me of the dishes from when I was a kid, when I was young, when you would serve me. And she said, those are your dishes from when you were a kid. I was like, what are you talking about? And she said, yeah, I got rid of those and I sold them to this guy a long time ago. And now he's reselling them among the rest of his stuff. So I actually had, not only was it nostalgia, I actually, for 25 cents a plate, was able to buy back the actual dishes that I grew up on, which I still have. Yeah.
So
Anyway,
it wasn't just like you had found somebody that had the same style or they bought them at the same
that's what I
source.
thought.
Like, those are the very plates you're saying.
The very plates. The very plates.
I
So
wanted to show
yeah.
Russ one little thing that I've given to Dean as well, and it is a Purple Heart customized superpowers action figure that my
Oh,
cousin printed for me, and it's actually translucent. You can probably tell as I put
yeah,
it in the light. But yeah, I gave Dean one of those as well. And I got
I
to give
have
one to
that.
Ricardo at some point.
Yep,
that's
absolutely.
super cool. That's very
So
cool.
So, Russ, did you have any questions for us or for all three of us
Well,
to
I had a
discuss?
fanboy question and I had like an existential question. So, in the interest of time, maybe just the fanboy question. And,
We can try to do
you know,
both because I got to be out in at 8, so we have a little bit of time if Vito has it.
I have plenty of time.
Okay.
okay. Well, the fanboy question first is if you guys had the opportunity to adapt a deep cut franchise that means something to you, and I'm thinking probably along the lines of television and film, if you had a chance to adapt it as a comic, that would be an
Oh,
ongoing continuation of that story or a soft reboot or something like that that's maybe never been touched by comics before. What would that franchise be? And I'll tell
I,
you what mine is, so it primes the
yeah,
pump.
please.
Mine is Lethal Weapon. The Lethal Weapon movies um, didn't get that bizarre treatment that a lot of movies of that ilk got in the 80s. Like Rambo got a cartoon and a toy line. RoboCop got a cartoon. Um, Lethal Weapon is pretty much just those four films, and I loved them as a kid. I still love them now. I actually just watched like 1 through 3 pretty recently, and I think that there's so much potential for their backstories, their developing friendship, all that supporting cast now. That it would be cool to see that unpacked as an ongoing monthly comic. So,
hot tip, hot tip. I love that idea, but hot tip. Do you ever read Joe R. Lansdale's Hap and Leonard series?
Hmm.
no, I haven't.
Oh, it's
Made a
great.
TV show of it too.
And they did make a TV show eventually, 2 seasons, I think, maybe 3.
Yeah.
And James Mickle, I think, was the showrunner, the director. But it's a great book series. He's written a lot now. And in fact, at the time, before they made the TV show more recently, but back then when he was writing them, let's say 90s and 2000 and all that, well, it was the 90s. It was the Lethal Weapon movies that ruined his ability to turn his books into the movies because they'd already had, it was a black and white character kind of a thing. They have opposing kind of, and I submit that the origin of the Lethal Weapon series and the origin, the source material of even Joe R. Lansdale's Hap and Leonard novels, which I need to talk to him about, and I do know Joe R. Lansdale because we had discussed me maybe doing a graphic novel with him with those characters. Is 10 Speed and Brown Shoe, starring Ben Vereen and
Jeff
Jeff
Goldblum,
Goldblum.
right?
Yeah. So anyway, Vito, do you have
Yeah, this is I wouldn't say this is a deep cut, but this is something I'm very, very passionate about. I've mentioned it a couple of times in other places, my affinity for time travel stories. And part of it I've always contended was my fascination with Marilyn Monroe, wanting to, as a child, even wanting to rescue her somehow. And the other part of it came from a little TV show called Voyagers! Exclamation point that came out in the early 80s and I think went for 2 seasons, canceled. And it like I own the box set. I already know what the story is. Jamal Igle and I have actually talked about this for a little bit. And I know exactly how to do the story. I know exactly what to do to bring it back and make it like popular again. But I don't know, man. It's I think it was a Stephen Cannell book or production, like A Team and stuff. But I would love to have my hands on that franchise.
I'm really curious because you know that my dad knew Marilyn Monroe the
Yeah.
last 8 years of her life. You can look up James Haspiel and the books he's written and all that stuff. And I've actually done a bunch of podcast interviews with my dad that I'll release at some point that I did with Whitney. But you know, I did meet John Eric Hexum,
Wow.
who I believe was
Yeah.
the adult Voyager, right?
Yeah.
With the kid. And then later on, he went and did a cop show where he accidentally killed himself by
It
shooting
was
a prop
actually
gun.
called, it was an actual, it was, I don't remember the name of it, but it was about models. And he was a model that was like a spy. It was a
That's right.
very cool show too. I watched it only because he was in it.
That's right. So I did meet John Eric Hexum with my father. And like I said, my dad knew Marilyn. I'm having a tough time answering this question because I actually I can you name one successful comic book adaptation of a TV show or movie?
Well, Dell and Gold Key were really
Hmm.
successful with that stuff in the 50s, 60s, 70s. So that might be a, well, yeah, there you go.
This is different. This is
So,
not adaptation,
yeah,
but I this is pretty good.
like
Mighty Samson.
I have a few issues of Get Smart, so that that stuff had more traction back then, whereas
Well,
now,
you could make the argument that any Jerry Lewis or Goody Rickles in the Kirby stuff is
Yep.
kind of like an extension of their TV personas, but it's hard to say.
yeah.
It's funny because I feel like when it's cinematic first, it's really hard to go, and I don't mean backwards like to a lesser medium, of comics, but it's just hard to suddenly put gutters and create static images. And yeah, you can tell good stories. I mean, I think maybe novels work well because again, you can imagine breathing, moving characters, right? But the minute you isolate them back into comics, it's hard. But if you started with a comic and they become movies, then you can criticize the movies all you want. Then you get the costume right, the voice, whatever, right? Because of the amount of imagination you put into the words and pictures with the gutters, At the end of the day, the gutters are the most important part of comics besides storytelling, but besides laying out. There's something about that pacing that happens. But I'm having a really tough time like figuring out what I would want to write and draw. I mean, I keep thinking about B. Arthur, which is absurd. So would I want to make a Maud comic? I don't think so. But if you let me put Maud like versus Bob Ross or in outer space, maybe now we're cooking with gas. You know what I mean? Like, uh, although, and this should be a movie, but I keep thinking they did make an Ash comic. Evil Dead Ash, right?
Dynamite
Mhm.
did, yeah.
Dynamite did, and I didn't read those, and maybe they're great, and I don't want to make a comic of this, but I do think, now we're being fanboys. I do think there needs to be an Ash movie where he fights every great Mad Men and monster character. Come on, man. Him versus Freddy Krueger, Michael Myers, Jason Voorhees, Leatherface, like keep going, man. Like
Mhm.
you have so much fun
The
with that,
green guy. Yeah.
So Leprechaun 4, Lep in the Hood.
You know what would be a really good first salvo for that kind of story? Ash in Japan fighting like all the not the kaiju, but like the girl from the ring and like
Oh
all
yeah,
the,
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
weird, creepy, things like that would be fun.
Totally, man. All right, so what's the existential question?
So the existential question is, and I want to make sure I'm taking the answer all of the above or both off the table. When you're Dean at the drawing board, Vito at the when you're writing a story, I was going to say at the word processor, like it's 1986. Um, are you purging? Is your subconscious intention when you're creating that thing to get your worldview out into the world no matter what, or to engage an audience in conversation? And I kind of have what those distinctions are in my mind, why one isn't necessarily the other. So, in other words, you have something you want to say and you just got to get it out there no matter what. Or are you thinking, I really want to engage an audience with this thing?
I kind of did something like that in the second volume of Stray, where we were trying to. I think I kind of screwed the pooch on it a little bit. I was trying to do kind of a Black Lives Matter underlying theme, and in it there's a scene where um, a cop pulls a gun on Midnight Tiger, who's African American hero, and Stray kind of chastises the cop. My distrust of cops and dislike of most authority figures probably came out more than not. And I don't know that I had stuck the landing per se on something like that, but it's there. And I think that like I put it out there not for anybody's approval or for anybody's uh, liking or disliking. It's just that it was a part of the story that I wanted to say, with especially the time that it was coming out was around the protests and George Floyd. There was a gentleman by the name of Philandro Castile that I still uh, kind of hurt over his death because he looks like a friend of mine. He looks like my friend Rich, who's a hip hop artist, and like to the dreads, everything looked just like him. And like when I saw his face on the news, like it legit scared me. So I was definitely not in the right frame of mind, maybe to write that because I was writing from a point of anger. But I think, going back to that's a specific instance. In the greater scheme of things, I think I want the work to kind of speak, and the lessons or the point of view that's coming across should be the characters, not necessarily mine. Do we share a lot of point of views? Yes. That's, I think, inevitable. But I do want them to speak with their voice, not with mine, if that makes it's a hard thing to kind of parse and to kind of pull off. But I think that's my attempt, at least. What about you?
Makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Oh, I like when I'm really in drawing and I haven't been like I have a tough time getting to drawing every day because I feel like I'm more and more writer than an artist or drawer than ever these days. And maybe because I see the limitations of my art more than ever. I don't know. Um, and yet I feel more unlimited in my writing or what I can address. But I think the best art is the art that you really do for yourself, you know. But to be a professional, someone that can hire you with a skill set to try to sell comics, you do need to think about other people because you're trying to sell to other people. And it's a weird line, another blurry line where like a lot of people, not a lot of people, but there is an audience that is craving you to be punk and you do you. And I want to see what keep pushing it. Don't be shy. Don't be afraid.
Yeah.
Because I feel like the minute you start thinking about more than one person, you start to like edit. Does that make sense? And
Absolutely. Yeah.
and I do wonder, I mean, I know I have drawn and written dated work. And so I do try to consider what is evergreen. I've used the term before earlier tonight. Like, what is something that you could pick up 10 years from now? And it may feel dated, for various reasons, but the essence of the story still matters, so it's weird because I had an epiphany myself once where I was driving somewhere, and then wherever you take a long shower or get in a car by yourself or wash dishes, you start thinking. Okay. And I was thinking a couple of things. One is, and I love to bring up Jack Kirby every episode, I was like, did Jack Kirby ever lay out a page before he drew it? I don't think so. I've never seen a thumbnail layout ever. Okay.
I actually, funny enough, I was reading Tomorrow's put out this book that I bought at Baltimore a couple of years ago called Old and New Gods. It's in the other room, otherwise I'd grab it and show it to you. And it actually shows a layout that he did for the last page of a Thor comic that said Ragnarok is coming, I think.
Oh.
So like he did something to the point to an extent.
But he probably did it on the board.
It looks really rendered.
I was going to say he probably did it on the board, and he always thought on the page. But more of the epiphany I had really was, oh no, every week he had to read a headline or pay attention to the news so he could react to it, so he could sell comic books. Mm-hmm. As did a lot of creators, or a lot of creators to this day do. You react to the headlines. Like, trust me, the kind of comics we're going to get the next 4 years. Like, it's easy to predict. Okay, but we also need those comics, but I do try to write and draw these days something that might be longer lasting. As much as it could comment on today, I want to comment on tomorrow too, and I did also used to write when I was more youthful, sad endings, horrific endings, bad endings. And then I went, oh no, I have a power here. If I can end it on a good note, a high note, a hopeful note, that's more important if I can figure that out and get there honestly and truthfully in some way. So I don't know if that answers it.
Yeah, it absolutely does. I just remember once, Dean, you saying that if you were like on a deserted island or something like that, when you immediately start or eventually start making comics because it's so in you. And I don't think you'd be able to resist some form of storytelling or chronicling your experience. You're obviously not at the point now where you're going to start thumbnailing in the sand, but the drive to create, I'm just wondering how common or prevalent it is for creative people to have that conversation with the audience at the forefront of their mind as they're making the thing, or is that just a consequence of making the thing? And then when you apply that mentality to social media, am I drawing something that I know is going to get me a guaranteed couple 100,000, 10,000 likes, or am I drawing something for me that may not garner as much traffic, but it's so true to me that I'm going to find my tribe inevitably by posting and sharing that thing.
I yield more to that. The finding your tribe, just like you could be turned on by an offbeat thing. I don't know. It all depends on the day,
I also think
and I always say that we're communication artists. We need to communicate our art too. So there is that fine line as well.
I was going to say, I also think that as we grow our art and we shrink our audience, we find the people that really we're speaking to. And then once we get to that kind of like to the skinniest you can squeeze into this corset of creation, let's call it. Once you get to that, then everything expands. Do you know what I mean? Like it's just like the breathe, like you've held your breath, now you're going to breathe, and then more people come to that as a result. I don't know that I can say that I've done that in practice, but a good way to gauge it is, maybe not the best way, but a good way to gauge it is, did your Kickstarter grow at least one backer every time you've done a Kickstarter? Or did you shrink? And like, I'm now in the shrinking part, with my Kickstarters. So like, I'm at the point where I'm being constricted as far as I can. And I think the next thing that I do is going to be like more expansive.
It's like right now you're at the phase of like a couple of junkies fighting over some resin,
That last scrap of foil.
Yeah.
And then once you kill the other dude, then you can like breathe and chill out and get a Mac rib sandwich, and then anyway.
All right. I want to thank Russ for joining us, and to do that, I can only think of one thing to do that would like commemorate this, and that's to flush the toilet.
Oh, beautiful.
You got to make a flushing sound.
We welcome you. Did you not hear it?
I could not hear.
Oh, that's okay.
Well, hey,
You got to mic the toilet, man.
I'll throw it in post.
Thanks to you guys, Vito. I've become a big fan of yours, and I really appreciate reading Stray.
Thank you.
You guys have been keeping me company at that drawing board as I've been working on this latest issue. Every time one of your new episodes drop, I have it on. It's just really fun to hear you guys and you're the history of your friendship and kind of as you evaluate the future of your creative careers. It's fun to be on this little journey with you guys as a fan and also now as a friend. So thanks for letting me be your inaugural guest. It's only going to go up from here for you guys. Guess what?
Well, unfortunately, now you have to listen to yourself talk next time the new episode comes up. So I know how that
But
goes.
Russ, tell people who are listening to this how to subscribe to you and find you.
So Amazing AZ Comics is my Instagram at Amazing AZ Comics. And there's a link tree to ordering past issues, but also, again, being able to subscribe to this coming year, which I would really encourage anyone to do if you want to support me at all. $30 means you're going to get 4 pretty substantial digests, minimum 32 pages each, full color interior of what I'm working on. And that's going to be the continuing adventures of my local superheroes. You don't have to live in Arizona to love it. You know, you've read Spider-Man your whole life. He lives in New York. I presume a lot of you folks listening don't live in New York. That never stopped you from, learning where Forest Hills was or anything like that. So come down to Phoenix with me virtually in my comics. And it's all the benefits. Maybe this will be a good tagline, Dean. It's all the benefits of Phoenix without the heat. So,
I love it.
but it's $30, which shakes out to $7.50 a digest, which I think is pretty competitive in today's market.
Yeah, especially with tariffs coming. Tariffs
Absolutely.
coming, everything's going to go up.
Yep. That's why I'm having these things printed in Paraguay. And
Oh my God!
But thank you so much, guys, for chatting with me.
And thank you guys, and have a great night. Rest of the night. All right.
Yay!